Hello everyone, this is the last episode of the Plague Doctor Mask. It's time to actually take this thing apart and do some casting. Here I'm cleaning up the fiberglass, removing some of the fuzzy and actually separating it out. You'll see that I also drilled some keyways that we'll use to bolt it together in the future. Interestingly enough, I didn't actually end up needing the fiberglass outer mold, as it actually stood up really nicely without it. So I didn't end up needing the keys or the fiberglass. So I may have made it a little bit thicker than it needed to be, but it's held up quite nicely. So it's very satisfying to crack these things off. They bend quite nicely, and then you can peel them off, make a nice hard shell. It's not exactly the nicest fiberglass job, but I wasn't trying to make something pretty. The next step now is to actually remove the 3D printed master. I put some baby powder on so it doesn't stick. This ended up being a lot more problematic than I expected going into this. The silicone actually seeped into all of the standoffs and just made not only extracting it hard, but casting in the future, because there's a lot of hills and valleys that need to be cleaned up during the actual casting process. So here I am using an X-Acto knife, trying not to stab myself, and a pair of pliers to try and chip apart the resin. Eventually I got to a point where I could actually remove the standoffs and actually peel them out, which was nice along that process. Once all of the standoffs were removed, I went ahead and peel it off inside out. You can see where all those standoffs kind of stick into the resin. I wish I had done more of this on camera, so I'll remember that in the future. I'm actually pulling it against my body here, trying to extract it. It's a bit of a pain this first time. So some things I noticed right off the bat were there are quite a few bubbles that had gotten into the casting, and these show up as little divots or little bubbles in the casts later on. They're kind of smooth, which is an interesting effect. In the future, I think I will make sure to dab further in and maybe try and use something to break some of that surface tension. So this first time I actually put the fiberglass on and bolted it together. I'm using Smoothcast 65D or 68D, which is a fast curing urethane resin, and it's awesome stuff. A little rigid, but it does have some, it's not as rigid as the 3D print. I'm also using a smooth on pigment, so I don't have to paint the base coat. So you can see that in the middle there, with the white top. So this is a 1-to-1 pour, and it does cure quite quickly, especially when you're casting at like 75 degrees or so. So it only has a couple minute pot life before it starts to thicken up. You're going to need more color than that, bud. Now it does look black here, but the cast is white, so if you don't put enough in, you'll end up with gray. And of course, make sure you keep it all in your mold. Now what I'm doing here is essentially a rotocast, where I'm actually manually smoothing it around. And it takes a while. So in the climate that I'm working in, it took about 15 minutes for it to gel up, and then when I actually went to get it to demolding was about 3 or 4 hours later. So you can see that the coloring is a little bit on the gray side. When we actually do some painting, it's not as noticeable. So chip out the stuff you don't need and pull it apart. Don't forget to move your knife so you don't stab yourself. There's a theme there, and a story. Anyhow, yep, that hurt. But it is a pretty build. The designer of this 3D print is amazing. After the casting, it's actually quite light compared to the 3D print. The 3D print has some heft to it, but this shell here is very, very light. So you can see the shiny areas are where bubbles had formed in the 3D print, or in the silicone. Some I was able to remove, but many of the others I just left there, so that because they're not noticeable once we do the dry brushing. Now these are caps that I cast earlier that just slide right on, and these will actually hold the filter material. Looks so cool. I ended up recasting those or doing new casts in black. They look really nice. Another tip, if you are doing the removing Overcast, probably should remove your watch. And definitely wear a mask. So I chipped out a bunch of the Overcast and then used a rotary tool to actually remove some of the insides as well as the holes where the filter goes. So you can see here I switched tools, and now there is a burr on here, and I used the shank of the burr and just positioned the shank as along the inside of the hole as a guide, and that cleaned up really nicely. There's a lot of dust here, so definitely wear a mask. Now I went back and used this burr to clean up the inside of the mask where the face is actually going to sit, and then smooth it up with some sandpaper. You can see me going back with the clippers and the hobby knife to actually go ahead and clean up some of those bubbles. Now I'm using a gold ink, which is really nice, and a disposable brush, and I'm dry brushing it. So dip the brush in, actually appear to wipe most of it off, and then just brush on the outside. Comes out quite nice. You can be pretty thick and heavy on this dry brushing. I was being a little conservative on this first one because I wasn't sure how much I was going to put on, but towards the end I ended up putting a whole bunch of drying brushing on this thing, and it looks really, really nice. I learned quite a bit on this project. I worked with a couple materials I had never used before, learned that some were not appropriate for this kind of casting, but maybe appropriate in future. Also learned how to use the biocompatible silicone, which I didn't actually show here. The video recording didn't come out, but I'll definitely show that in a future video. Well, thanks for watching, and if you like what you see, leave me a note, and don't forget to subscribe and all that. Thanks.